We'll call the Tuesday, March 16th, 2021, King County Levy Court committee meetings to order. And prior to going into the meetings, we'll have the county administrator explain how the call-in and the phone system works.
Thank you, President Pepper. Yes, this evening's committee meeting is being held in person here at 555 Bay Road in Dover at the Levy Court Chambers. However, we also make the meeting available to folks remotely via WebEx. And for folks who may be joining us via WebEx, we're certainly glad that you're with us tonight. Just want to let you know that tonight's meeting is a committee meeting, and there are points along the way through the meeting where there's opportunity for public comment. If people who are watching via WebEx, either on the phone or via their computer, wish to address Levy Court during those points in the meeting, we will prompt you at those times, and just so you're aware, *6 will will unmute you, and we'll be able to bring you into the meeting and have you address your points to Levy Court during public comment. And we'll prompt you at those points along the way. And as a committee meeting, the rules of procedure that have been adopted by Levy Court for committee meetings are in effect, along with the Mason's Rules of Order. And this meeting is being recorded. And with that, Mr. President, turn the floor back to you.
Thank you. We have all 7 commissioners present and the county administrator. The first item on the agenda is Planning Services Committee, and Mr. Buxton. Turn it over to you, sir.
Well, I appreciate you. Ms. Kiefer and Mr. Atkins, you're going to, I don't know how you want to do this. I guess you guys will share the conversation. Gentlemen, gentlewoman, the idea tonight is, again, to talk about something that I'm sure is relevant to all of us. However, I believe, right, that we are, after it moves on from here, it's first going to go to the Building and Code Committee review. Fair enough?
If you want their advice, then yes, we can send it to them.
I think out of respect, it probably should, and then probably come back to us for another committee meeting, just a quick one maybe, or does it go right to an agenda?
That's your choice.
So I guess we could have that conversation when we're done this one tonight about whether or not, if it has substantive change or recommendation, it probably should come back to a committee. But anyway, so this is one that I think we should all have our ears perked for. All right, Ms. Kiefer, go ahead.
Just a quick overview. Both ordinances are related. I think all commissioners have gotten complaints from residents regarding either water in basements or drainage from sump pumps, taking water out of basements. And over the years, Levy Court has made some incremental changes to the building code to try to address, in particular, wet basements. And those have worked to a large extent. This has been an incremental improvement. So the first ordinance, LC 2105, addresses the building code. And it it tries to address both of those issues. One, water in basements, where it calls for an additional sump pump and an interior drainage system, which is not currently required. And it also works to address the resulting drainage from those sump pumps, which I think have been a lot of the drainage complaints we've gotten recently. And it does that by, in different circumstances, working to establish the elevation for the basement. And we've come up with the help of KCD, different categories based on where you're building, whether you're on on-site septic, and then we use the evaluation to determine where the elevation would be. If you're in a major subdivision, we have criteria for determining where it would be. And then if you've got neither of those, you've got other alternatives to do a geotech report to determine where the elevation should be. It also includes that for new major subdivisions, for LC 2106, that's an amendment to the subdivision code. So for new major subdivisions, they would do this work prior to final plan approval. So we'd start the project knowing where those elevations would be. So again, we worked with KCD to develop these to try to address the complaints the county's been getting, addressing both basements and the resulting drainage from the sump pumps. Jared is here from KCD if you've got technical questions. Scott Tanner is also on the phone if you've got other building code questions. We did send these for comment to the Home Builders Association. Their recommendation was to effectively choose one or the other. Rather than dealing with the basement construction and dealing with drainage, after speaking with Jared, our recommendation continues to be deal with both because they're separate issues, related but separate. So with that brief overview, I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, Jared Atkins from KCD is here as well.
Oops, I keep hitting that button. Anybody have an initial statement or question? Well, Mr. Pepper?
Sarah, one of the things that I've seen are very large houses on small lots. When they have water, they pump the water out into the yard, and they don't have enough yard to contain their water. Consequently, it runs over onto their neighbors and everything like that. So does this address that?
It at least attempts to call for it to tie into the existing stormwater system. Certainly within a major subdivision, that's generally easier. Of course, out in the rural areas, you've got more space to work with typically, so you're not impacting your neighbor. I would not say this ordinance is a complete fix. I think this continues to be iterative. And I think going forward with new major subdivisions, it's something we can impact earlier in the process, so we're not dealing with it at construction.
Thanks, Commissioner Buxton. So, Sarah,
I guess it's
on that note,
perfect.
if somebody does come to us and says, the guy put in new drain in his basement and he now floods my backyard.
Right.
That's illegal, correct? And can be dealt with by doing what?
In those situations, typically what we've done is we'll do the site visit. If we can, we'll make recommendations about where to direct the drainage to try to keep it away from neighbors. KCD has also been very helpful in making recommendations about how to redirect.
But recommendations don't have to be followed. They're not directives.
If they don't, at that point, it's a violation of the county code to negatively impact your neighbor, right? Our interest is solving the problem. That's how we go about solving the problem, but it is a violation.
So the recommendation comes with 30 days to fix it. Then we go back and they haven't fixed it. It's another 30 days during the rainy season of, now you have 30 days to repair it, or we're going to cite you, or what?
If there's no indication of cooperation, we'll cite immediately. So we start that process.
Okay. I want to make sure that's clear because, I mean, I've had a couple that people just flaunt it in our face and just refuse to make any changes. And, you know, I get constant phone calls from the neighbor saying he's still doing it. Yeah, he ran a pipe out to the yard, cut his grass first time, back running in my backyard. So
Right.
those are the type of things we need to resolve. We need to resolve quickly.
And if it's clear that we're not going to get compliance, we can absolutely start the violation process immediately.
Okay. And that it includes new citations that we enacted last year. All right, so this also calls for internal drainage. Where is it?
An interior drainage system,
Interior
yes.
drainage. You're talking about French drain or something like that
Yes.
on the inside of the house.
Yes.
So do we require them to put in secondary power systems to power sump pumps or anything like that?
I don't believe so, but I would yield to Scott Tanner on that.
Scott?
Scott, if you're on the line, if you can press *3 so we can identify you.
He lost the connection apparently, so he's calling back in.
I do have one subdivision that has constant basement water problems. They now have 2 sump pumps running, and when one fails, their basement floods. So I want to make sure that, we have something in place that tells the builder, you're building a basement, we know it's in an area that floods, you have to do everything you can to mitigate it. And I had a guy come out and look at flooding because my basement was flooding. And he gave me 3 choices. He said the easy choice is to put a French drain in for about $8,000. The hard choice is to dig out all the dirt away from your foundation, seal everything up, put plastic sealer over it, $30,000, or just put in drains on your downspout so it runs the water away from the house for $15, $20. That's what I did. Not a single water problem since then.
What was the question that you asked about? You said power source? Because there's
Yeah, so that so that any sump system they have to put in, because we're requiring it, is also effective enough to stay ahead of any rain, and that includes some kind of alternative power that keeps the system running even when they lose power in the house.
question to Scott was, do we require that?
Yeah, I don't believe
I
we
doubt
do.
that.
I
mean,
don't see it
that's-
in here, but
I don't think that's anywhere present. That's a,
It's certainly not in this section of the building code.
I mean, I'm not sure that it should be, but I just, that seems to be one of the biggest problems that I've been facing is, yeah, I've got 2 sump pumps, but invariably one's always in a fail state because there's no power to it or something.
Right, and Scott just confirmed that there's no code
Okay,
requiring it.
thank you.
question would be, how would that look, and how is it even feasible? Maybe that's something the Building and Codes Committee
We can take a
weigh
look
in
at it
on.
and what it would mean.
It's not a recommendation of ours. It was just a
Sure.
curiosity question.
It is. I mean, it goes to quality workmanship because if I have a builder that says, yeah, we can put in the Chevy system that, the power goes out, we're sorry, or we can put in for $1,000 more the Cadillac system that has redundant power, then that might be what I have to do in order to stay above the water in my basement. I have an indoor pool.
Commissioner Angel?
Thank you, Commissioner Buxton. I agree with Commissioner Sweeney. Exactly the same thing I was going to ask too, was about a backup system, at least one of the sumps be having backup because due to the power shortages in the area. But also the interior or the French drain. If you have a basement, I would think you'd want to have a French drain anyway with 2 sumps and one with a battery backup because, for example, I know my house on my street, I'm the only one with a basement and it has flooded many times this year due to the rain. And yes, my downspouts have grading away from it as well as extensions so the water doesn't come down, but unfortunately that's not working because the ground level is going to seek its own level, which it's doing. So I actually have somebody come and giving me an estimate too about probably a French drain putting in and 3 sump pumps with one as a battery backup. So, but I also have 3 developments. They don't have basements, they have crawl spaces that are flooded all the way up to the window. So, and I'd like to see them have an extra sump put in, but once again, as Mr. Pepper said, Commissioner Pepper said, the lots are, the houses are bigger and there's not as much space, so the water's got to run somewhere, and it might run onto your neighbor. If it runs down to the street, it's going to run down to the storm drainage system, and then it's going to probably get into our sewer system, which is another problem. So I can tell you that coming over here tonight, Clearview, the new housing development across the street from us, they have 3 homes right now that are pumping 24/7 water every single day. They got green grass all winter long. And the water is coming out across the sidewalk, into the drainage system, into the street. Now, I know it's the city of Dover, but it's going to happen if we don't do something to help out, whether it's city or county. We need to talk to the city, which I think we can put that on our liaison meeting list to have that discussion. So, but I'd like to see it tighten up a little bit too, so we have a little bit more waterproof issues taken care of with a backup and a French drain system, an internal system that if you're going to have a basement as a backup, keep the mold down, keep the mildew down. That's to me just a common sense thing.
And I would note that crawl spaces are addressed in here because we see those same problems in crawl spaces. And to Mr. Sweeney's question, I don't think it would be unreasonable to require battery backups for the sump pumps. But certainly if we're going to take this to the Building Code Review Committee, we'll put that in front of them as well.
Commissioner Buckman. The other thing too is that with the new standards for the plastic and the sealing of the floor and the concrete for crawl spaces and ground, well, they're going to get soaking wet and it's going to cause an issue too. So if there's any way that that can be looked at to where the water can be drained away so it doesn't, the mildew and mold doesn't start and have to be tore up, or just because it's going to seek its own level.
The goal is again twofold, is to get the basements elevated enough so the infiltration of groundwater is not as significant as we're seeing. And also the second sump pump, the interior drainage system, give you more tools to get water out so basements don't end up flooded.
I understand about the basement, but crawl spaces right now.
And they're addressed as well in this ordinance.
Well, I can tell you the ones that I've seen, they're a pool right now.
Sure.
I mean, that's the only way I can call it. They got an indoor pool.
That's why we included them, because we're seeing it as well.
Mr. Atkins, do you mind stepping up for a sec? Don't go anywhere, Ms. Kiefer. So one of the things that I did, and I think we all maybe did, we said, hey, we've got an issue. We'd like some recommendations from folks who are in the game. And you worked with Sarah to articulate your thoughts and put together what you think is a very good ordinance, I would assume. Listening to the conversations, do you see what's in here as addressing some of those conversations? Are we devoid or void of anything, rather?
No, I believe both ordinances together address the issue. Like Sarah said, the first issue is keeping the water out of the basements. The second issue is what do we do with that water that we're pumping? And one way to avoid pumping all that water is to make sure the basements aren't into groundwater in the very first place. When we review plans for drainage and stormwater, we take a hard look at where we expect groundwater to be when we set our stormwater facilities. So some of that information is already available on the site plans. And it is very challenging to deal with a homeowner when I'm standing in the street and I'm looking at the stormwater pond on one side and I'm looking at his basement on the other side of the street, and clearly his basement is lower and deeper than the stormwater pond. And knowing that the stormwater pond is where groundwater is at that point, you can just look across and see that his basement's 3 to 4 feet into groundwater. So his sump pumps are always going to be running. He's always going to be discharging water onto his neighbor or into his backyard, and things are just never going to dry out. So like Sarah said, both of these issues together I think are important to address the issue. Waterproofing the basements, but also getting the basements above and out of the groundwater.
Listening to some of the concerns and nothing, let me ask Ms. Kiefer, and it's okay if you need to jump back, you might be able to say from there. Are all of these on new housing permits, or are some of them kind of weak because they only will apply to new developments?
Right. The building code changes are any permit going forward after adoption. The subdivision code change is any new subdivision.
I'm building in my neighborhood, there's an extra lot, and I go put a basement in. Am I using the old basement standards or the new ones?
You're using whatever's in the building code.
Okay. Angel and Commissioner Pep.
Thank you. This is for Mr. Jared Atkins, please. Jared, thank you for all the help you've given me for Fieldstone, Nobles Pond, Persimmon Park Place, and everybody else I've called you on, because I know at Fieldstone, it was a swell that was higher than when the water couldn't get around to get down to the stormwater management. Then there was a house that was higher than the house that was below it, and their crawl space was filling and sumping water. So, but that all is part of grading too, which is one of the things I think we're going to try and look at, so it can be deterred away from the house and led a different way, like a swell, I hope. Yes. But I just wanted the public to thank you, because for 14 years, I know you've been, out of my 16, you've been helping me on those places, and they're still having the same problems, but you know, it is what it is. Hopefully we can get it better as we work with it. So, but just wanted to thank you personally.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sarah, quick question. I don't recall, it's been a while since I've even looked at it, but how do we address downspout water? A lot of our, like I said, we've got big houses and small lots with narrow side yards. How do we address that in our code?
Primary focus initially is keeping it away from the house. But it gets back to the original question about small lots, about where we direct it. I don't know that our code is especially specific. What this calls for is that it has to tie into an existing stormwater system, and it has to meet certain setbacks to try to alleviate that problem.
Yeah, because what I see is the discharge from the downspouts and the sump pumps competing for space in the yard to soak into the yard. And a lot of times, depends on the elevation of the lots around it, you know, it could end up on the adjoining property very quickly, especially on a hard rain. And I was just wondering how we address that since the, you know, side yards have gotten smaller over the years.
They have, you're correct.
Any other comments? So I don't see any. So the directive now, right, unless there's something to add to it, is take this over to Building and Code Committee. Are they still meeting monthly, or do you have to schedule something?
They don't meet regularly once they finish reviewing the entire building code, so we'll call a meeting of them. And then the second ordinance, the 2106, that would actually go to the Planning Commission. So we can get that scheduled at the Planning Commission. We'll take LC 2105 to the Building Code Review Committee and bring, if there are substantial recommendations, we'll bring that back to committee. And if not, we can actually work to get it scheduled for a hearing.
There's nothing really to describe in the second ordinance that's differing.
It's
So if there
trying to
is-
achieve the same thing and establish the elevations rather than at building permit. For a major subdivision, do it prior to final plan.
So I think we got some clear directive. Everybody's good with that? You good with everything right now?
Perfect.
I know there may or may not be a couple folks I have tried to, and I know Ms. Kiefer has also tried to make sure that some folks who are in the business know about it, not just the Home Builders Association, but maybe some local builders that you know. It's always nice to make sure they get their input. So I did receive some positive comments. In fact, what I got from some very reputable builders was, we're already doing that. Or, yeah, we're not in the business of flooding basements because it's a pain for us. So we don't necessarily have that problem, and we don't think others should also. So that was a plus. Anyway, so enough said with that. I guess the next statement is Before I, well, no, because it doesn't matter. It can still be a public comment afterwards from somebody on the phone. So a show of hands to follow through with our action, I guess, and moving the one on to the RPC, correct? Okay, so we're good, unanimous. Any public comments? Any public comments in the venue? And then,
If there's anyone that's on the WebEx that would like to make a comment, please press *3 to raise your hand so that we can unmute you. No takers at this time.
okay, Mr. President, back to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Jared, for coming in tonight. Appreciate it. All right, the next item on the agenda is Public Works Committee. Mr. Howell, turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have two items, and Ms. Gold will address on both.
Good evening, Commissioners. Our first item tonight is Biosolids Capacity Expansion Project, Loan Acceptance, and Amendment of Professional Services Agreement with RK&K. On March 3rd, 2021, we received a letter of commitment offer from the state in the amount of $13 million for a 20-year loan at 2%. I kind of jumped right into that, but to give you some background, we awarded a contract for RK&K to help us with this project in November of 2018, and we started out in a study phase, trying to determine what kind of equipment we wanted to replace our old aging equipment. We have used grain dryers and belt filter presses. And the study's findings were presented in September of 2019. And then we worked to finalize a contract with RK&K. So originally the request for qualifications for engineering services was designed with the idea that it would include the entire project, but we had to complete the study to understand what direction we were going and get that cost estimate. So right now, our preliminary cost estimate for the project is $24.7 million. And this is again, a capacity upgrade. So with that capacity upgrade, it allows impact fees to be used for payment of the project. And so the remainder of the cost besides the loan would be paid for by main system capital improvement fees. So currently, RK&K has provided an estimate to complete the design of the job, and that is $3 million. That's for design, bid documents, and construction phase services. And that summarizes where we are. We're looking for Levy Court approval to accept the funding and to amend the contract with RK&K and authorize the president to sign both documents.
Any questions or comments? So the total is 24.7, 13 million would be a loan from DenDirect at 2%, and the rest could be taken care of through impact fees?
Correct. And as we proceed through the design, there will be additional cost estimates. So there may be factors that we don't know about at this time, but the current cost estimate is $24.7 million.
Okay, very good. Any questions or comments? Consent agenda? 7 up, item number 2.
Item number 2, FY 2018 to FY 2020 Trash Collection Services Contract. Change order number 2 is a 1-year contract extension. So this contract was first awarded in March of 2017 and was initially for 3 years. Last year, it was extended for 1 year at no price increase for both vendors. So included in your packet is a memo showing the prices for year 1 through year 5, assuming that the proposed increase is approved. So year 5, the vendors are looking at a 3% increase in their cost. Now, in terms of the cost as it relates to the county customer, we use a blended rate. We have 50% of our customers assigned to each vendor, roughly 50%. It's probably more 51%, 49% currently. And I did check an analysis on that to see if the contracts were balanced. So what that does is our existing rates are $312.50 for all three services. And if you take the two rates and blend them together, you see a 5.3% increase. And for the two services, trash and recycle, you see a 5.6% increase. So I want to make sure the commissioners are aware that 3% from our vendors doesn't necessarily translate the same way to our customers.
Last part again?
The vendors are seeing a 3% increase in what we're paying them. But what the customers are seeing is in that table in the middle, at the bottom of the memo, they're seeing a little over 5% increases. So there's the third page attached to the memo, or essentially, I guess it's the third page of that packet piece, it shows basically how the rates are averaged together, and that's what's used to provide the rate for our customers. So originally, when that was done with a 3-year contract, we took the 3 prices, year 1, year 2, year 3, for each vendor, and came up with a blended rate. So they're seeing a higher increase because there was no vendor increase last year. The rates have been the same since 2019.
Is the 5.3 and 5.6 fixed to a specific cost, or is it kind of a located cost? So 5.6 isn't a hard number. It could be 5.5.
I rounded to the first decimal place, but it's based off of basically a calculation of going from 28, if you look at the one for trash and recycle, it's $284.50. And the increase to $300.50 is 5.6%.
It is what it is. We just did a $13 million 4-second decision. And this is going to sound relevant or not when it comes to trash. 5.6 versus the 5.5, which means 298 versus a 300, believe it or not, might prevent a phone call. If you don't agree, let's stay with the 5.6. If it's not impactful to move to a 5.5 and keep the bottom bill at 290 something, then say that.
But the piece is there that it's not one-to-one, that a 3% increase from the vendors, because the vendor pricing is different for each vendor, gives a blended rate, and you see a different impact to the customer.
I just asked you, and I think you agreed that the 5.6 isn't a fixed number. It could have been 5.5. You simply round it up. Guys, get me off the mic. If you don't agree, that's perfectly fine. Let's move on. If you do agree, I think when people see the bill, 2 numbers in the 300s increases. All right, move on. They don't agree. Let's move on. Leave it as is.
So tonight, again, we're here asking for approval of the 2 change orders. The motion has 1 for each vendor. I don't know if there's any additional questions.
Any more comments or questions? Mr. President.
Mr. Buxton, can you explain what you were just trying to explain to us?
I thought, because we've all fielded these types of calls, right? I was simply looking at the increase. $329 and $300. Now we have 2 bills both over $300. In the trash world, that's a big number, even though it's not. So the point I make was hoping to keep one of them, the one that was at 284, try to keep it, it's only at 300.50. Can we keep it under 300 by going from 5.6 to 5.5? I'm just throwing it out there. Yes, it's silly, and if it's so silly that you want to move on, then let's move on.
I understand what you're saying now, and yeah, I agree. By rounding that number to the other direction, would that put it under the 300?
So in terms of, it's a calculation, it's just saying that what the rates were calculated at on that third page. The discussion tonight is not to set the rate, but I wouldn't mind discussing it again, but I would like to have Susan Durham, her input on that to the commissioners on what that impact does. And I wasn't necessarily prepared to answer a question about adjusting the rate, so I'm sorry that I wasn't prepared. But with that, the main question is, are we interested in extending the contract for 1 year? And both vendors have offered to do that for a 3% increase in their cost of services. And that is shown, their rate for year 5 is shown on page 2.
Right, Mr. Sweeney had a question.
Thanks, sir. So Diana, first of all, I'm okay with extending a year because if we have to renegotiate this year, it's probably going to go up tens of dollars more. Second of all, if we take that $300.50 and lower it to $299.50 because of appearance sake, does that not mean that our enterprise fund is going to come out short?
It could mean that. That's why I'd have to do further analysis on it, sir.
Okay. All right, thanks.
So some additional information, I'm not sure if some information the vendors provided to help justify the increase included, there's been tonnage increases. One of the vendors saw between 2018 and 2019 saw a 2% increase in tonnage. But between 2019 and 2020, when COVID came in, they saw a 15.3% increase in tonnage. That was confirmed by the second vendor who said they saw at least 14% increases in tonnage. They're also seeing changes in the disposal cost at DSWA. DSWA changes the differential disposal fee. The rebate that they receive back decreases by $1 each year. And again, that the last increase to the vendors was actually in June of 2019. So I provide that as information that the vendor supplied me to help provide justification for the increase.
Any other questions or comments? All right, consented. What, did you have a question? Okay, got a couple more.
Just one more question. Diana, when you come back with the analysis of what it's going to do to the enterprise fund if we do adjust that rate, I'd like to know how many customers are on each of the 2 vendors that we provide.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
I could let you know that I did look at the increase, so that the current increase for and actually I do have those numbers with me tonight. So this is as of June 30th.
You can just email it to me.
Okay,
That'd be fine. Thanks.
that works.
Any, Mr. Angel?
Thank you, sir. I just want to go on record to say that every time I've had an issue and I've called you and you've given me somebody to call, Christy Sweet, every time we've had a discussion, everything got rectified really quick, painstaking, none. I mean, it was perfect. So I just want to go on record with GFL, with how they're handling the business for our trash and say thank you.
You're welcome.
All righty, so the issue is extending the contract for a year to May 31st, 2021. Consent agenda, all in favor? 7 up. Thank you. Are there any questions from anyone in the audience or on the telephone?
If there are any public comments, either in the room or on the WebEx, if WebEx visitors want to press *3, we can unmute you and bring you into the room. Anyone in attendance can come to the podium.
Again, that's one more time. If you're on the WebEx, you can press *3 or press the raise hand icon. Takers at this time.
Mr. President, back to you.
Thank you. The next item on agenda is Administration Committee. Mr. Angel, turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Cuela, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Angel. So, Commissioners, in your packet for this meeting was a report from the Pension Review Committee regarding the county's 457 deferred compensation record keeping and administrative services provider. So, it recommended that the incumbent be retained for this service. And that was based on 2 major issues. As you see from the report, there's a list. But the 2 biggest drivers of I think the recommendation to stay with the incumbent was a significant reduction in their basis point fees from 80 to 14 basis points, and a new method for determining the fund selections, which is going to be an open format rather than the more specific format that's currently selected by the provider. So the overall cost difference, like I said, was 80 basis points, which in our $9 million completely employee contributions, no county money is in the 457 program. It would drop the fees from, if it had been $9 million, from about $64,000 down to $12,000. Also included in the recommendation is the retention of Siegel Marco advisors. And what they would do is they would do some performance monitoring, similar to what they do for the county's pension plan. And you may recall earlier approving the selection of Siegel Marco, but that was predicated on selection of a different vendor. And the fee for that is $8,000, which would be collected from the participants, and another fee, another service that will be provided by Siegel Marco would be the actual fund selection. And that fee of $5,000 is to be paid by the vendor, and at least to date, the ICMA Retirement Corporation has agreed to fund that cost. So we have been working on getting the final services agreement drafted. County attorney and I had a discussion with them, I think, last week. The attorneys, I think, have agreed to the indemnification language, and we are also working with the consultant to make sure all the other terms of the agreement meet what was included in the RFP response. So back to you, Commissioner Angel.
Any questions for Mr. Quill? Well, I got a few, Callan, so I know this is going to be going forward for, I disagree with this process, so, and the reason being is, over the years that we had them, they were charging us 80 basis points, and then I guess once they found out there was a possibility we were going to lose them, they dropped it to 14 basis points. So that much of a gouge, for me, I have a hard time trusting somebody that did that much and drops that low. I have a problem with that. I always have. Haven't been able to get past it, and Mr. Quayle has been very grateful and very eloquent in trying to change my mind, but I just can't get past that point. Of the submissions that were given, there was 8 submissions. Our consultant picked Nationwide as their pick. Is that correct?
So when an RP was drafted back in 2019, I think it went out in late 2019, there were 8 responses. And the consultant evaluated those because it was designed in the RFP that there would be an interview panel process. And obviously there was no interest in interviewing 8. So there was some selection processes, fees not being the primary driver of that process, to reduce the number of 8 down to a reasonable number to interview, which was 3. And they ultimately recommended, and in the ranking, Nationwide from that process was scored out of the 3, the number 1. They had the number 1 ranking, followed by Voya, followed by ICMA, our Retirement Corporation. But that was the interview panel ranking, not ranking of the overall, selection process. Because the interview process does a lot of things. One, you could get an even lower quote on the fees as a result of the interviews. You learn a lot of things, as we did as part of the process. and including participant retention after a year, what their rates were for actually signing up participants. So it was a very informative process. And ultimately, the majority of the interview panel did recommend retention of the incumbent for the reasons I mentioned earlier.
I understand what you just said, but I just wanted a simple yes or no.
No, I'm sorry.
Nationwide was selected by our consultant.
It was ranked out of number one out of the 8 RFPs received, yes.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Quayla? Mr. Buxton?
I thought we were into the budget process already. Oops. Doesn't matter. Mr. Quayler, are you in favor of the recommendation from the pension committee? Would you have voted in favor of that?
So I was a member of the selection panel and certainly have had the opportunity over my years to defer compensation in there. Fortunately, and the other member of the panel was another individual who has a decent amount in the fund. So as a participant myself, fees are certainly a very important aspect of that. And I would say that my experience with the incumbent is that I did not put the amount of money that I have in that fund. It has grown to the level it has grown, and that would be because of, I don't think my good selection of investments, but perhaps their good stewardship of the deferred compensation that was in there. So yes, I do recommend the incumbent ICMA Retirement Corporation.
I was long-winded.
Yes, sorry about that, but
The point I want to get back to again is, yes, you support me.
I do, for
in
all the
favor of that
reasons
one.
I just mentioned.
That, with you, I just wanted to make sure I was on point.
Any other questions for Mr. Quayle?
Mr. Chairman, one other thing, and it's not in the motion that I drafted, is at least when we started this process some time ago, and I think I raised it whenever we brought the consultant RFP responses to Levy Court to approve. It may, since it's been recommended now that by the consultant, and certainly you're about to potentially approve an agreement with Siegel Marco to do performance reviews, that it may be important to formally designate the Pension Review Committee as the committee that you would like to review that performance, much like they do for your pension plan, and incorporate in their annual report to you their recommendations, observations about the performance of the deferred comp plan. So that would be a recommendation as well, that you assign that task to the Pension Review Committee. And perhaps you could incorporate that into motion, Mr. Angel. If you move it to consent, I can write it in there.
How many outside individuals, not county employees, are on the committee?
There are 4 citizen members and 3 employee members of the Pension Review Committee.
4 citizens, none of them have a relationship with the county as far as retirement or anything like that?
No. One is a retiree, one, yes. But I don't believe he has any money in this fund.
Anybody else? Okay, move this forward to the business meeting. 7 up?
Thank you,
Is
Commissioner.
that a consent agenda item?
No.
It looked like it was. There was 7 hands up.
Meeting, Mr. Pedramaj, I didn't say consent.
Okay, under new business?
Okay, parking lot discussions. Mr. Buxton, you want to take those two, sir?
As you recall, these are leftovers from a little while back, and what I'd like from the commissioners is to put it out there that you're willing to have, I would look to Mr. Mike or Mr. Pettit-Demise to decide how we would go forward, but that you're interested in what it would look like, what something like a customer service performance feedback type of platform would look like at the county level. We're all exposed to it now and experienced with it, whether you pick up a phone and make a call, whether you visit somebody in person or whether you go by way of email, heck, even a text. You don't even have to do anything other than show up and you're getting requests for feedback and those types of things from major corporations to smaller ones. So all I'm suggesting is that if you agree, that we don't agree to do that tonight, that we agree to have a present or something like that on what it would look like and what we would, kind of envision possibly doing. And just put the employees on record that, no, tonight we didn't make a decision to do this, but we are, so that you can hear from them also. Mr. Pettit-Demise, is that a roundabout way of saying it rightly? I'm not asking you to agree or disagree, but I'm asking you, did I effectively?
Yeah, I think you did, Mr. Buxton. And as you mentioned, if you've been on any kind of, either online exchange with a customer service representative or a phone call, you most likely there's some indication of either taking a brief survey afterwards or that sort of thing. And I think that's what Mr. Buxton is suggesting that we look into. And there's a number of possible products out there that are programs that you can adhere to that are fairly reasonable. And I don't know if there's any questions, but I think that's basically it.
Yeah, very quickly, it doesn't necessarily even have to be a survey, something that says after, we'll say someone's called Sarah's group about an application for a permit. It could be, thank you very much for your call, but is there anything else we can help you with? If not, thank you so much for reaching out to us. Just extending yourself just a little bit more than what you normally would, other than thank you.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many places I call now for any service, whether it's Comcast, AT&T, Direct, whatever, they always say, is there anything else we can do to help?
Thanks, Mr. Buxton. So this is definitely a paradigm shift for our employees, because after every interaction with the customer or with our customer base, it's going to be the employee's responsibility to say, number one, did I solve everything? Number two, here's a website that you can go to for a survey. And I mean, I've had enough of them say, hey, I need you to do a survey for me. Give me all 10s when you're done. But I mean, it's right now, Kim Crouch, the director of IT, did share with a couple of us what Newcastle County has. And I believe MGO already has a response survey built into it I think it's for the planning side. I don't know that it would be for public safety, for a paramedic service or public works. I don't know if we can make it expand out, but MGO may be something that we can just use that's already embedded in the system.
Another one. So one of the things I want to make sure that I articulate from my position. My experience has been there's been a dramatic shift and improvement in some of the conversations I have with different entities. And I do not see this, if you agree, because it's not me. I've heard enough of you have conversations about this. This is an opportunity for us to answer the call, which is always the only time you ever hear anything, it's negative. Think about it. The only time we do hear things, it's negative. In fact, I think you're going to see, I truly believe this because I've done it, leave more positive message, significantly more positive message than negative, right? So I think this is an opportunity for us to hear about the good. And again, it's not even us. I don't know how the information's processed, utilized, or anything else. That's not for us to decide tonight. That's something maybe we would get in a committee. But if I heard someone, a committee, or if you guys were to agree, if an employee reached out, I 100% think this would be about the positive feedback that we all know occurs that doesn't get recognized as much as a blight, a negative. That's it. Commissioner Angel?
Mr. Buxton, this is the perfect time for this subject coming up because we just had an incident happen that was handled, but Mr. Pedramage has always stressed customer service relations with us and our people and the public. And when something happens, it needs to be dealt with right away. And I would like to see something put in place so that doesn't have to come in. He shouldn't have to take his time away to take care of a constituent's problem and get it back to the director and let them handle it because they didn't know. So if there's some way of having something like this where it can be elevated to a higher elevation, if you will, so it can get handled quicker, not taking it all the way to the top and then coming down. But at the same time, our administrator needs to know there is an issue. So that's up to the director then to contact the administrator. But I'd like to see something where something was put in place so we have a record. And I think Mr. Cuelos, I think we have something in place to help employees with customer service too, to get them help. Is that correct? Yes? So just to get it out there, let them know that they can get help or we can get them help for how we handle an issue or fix an issue.
You good with?
Yeah, I think with all these tools that are out there for customer service analytics and the goal is to reinforce and promote a positive customer experience. That's really what it's about, and they're intended not to be punitive. They're intended to promote the positive. I just last week had to deal with our credit card vendor on an issue. And when I called, the 800 number or whatever, and this is the county credit card, not my personal one. When I called, there was a recording that came on and said, at the end of this call, we would appreciate if you would take a brief survey. And then someone answered the phone, how may I help you? And then we did the business, and they did ask, is there anything else I can help you with today? No. And then the person said, well, there's a brief survey at the end. I'd appreciate it if you take a few minutes and do it. And, it was really so quick. It was like 1 through 5, you just press the number on your phone, and it took about 10 seconds to answer 3 questions about the performance of the person. And that's just positive reinforcement back to the organization that their employees are conducting themselves as trained on the phone or whatever. And there's a lot of other products like that out there, but it could be an online survey like Commissioner Sweeney was talking about for MGO. It could be something on the phone if that's what the focus is, or it could be all of those things. Even in-person interactions, people have an opportunity to communicate back. But again, the purpose of all of them and the reason private industry is doing it is for positive customer experience. That's the only reason these tools are being promoted. Thank you.
It's not attempting, as you stated, punitive. It's not opening up opportunities for negative. We already have that. Regrettably, that's true. The only time I typically hear it is then. It's an opportunity for people to respond back in a positive way. You go to Redner's and get your receipt. They hand it to you and say, if you like my service, whatever, here's a website you can go to. I don't know if the participation's that high or not. I don't know. Anyway, I guess what I'm going to end with is this. I can take the heat for having my name up there on it, but what I would like from you guys is to understand that all of you some of you have had a conversation about positive feedback. So I'm going to leave it up to you. If you agree with what you've heard, then I'd like you to identify that. The reason that we're bringing it up like we have tonight is because, in fairness, we haven't taken any action other than look into it. And I would like the employees in advance to know, rather than hear about it as a decision's being made. And it needs to come from all of us. If it's not going to come from all of us, then it's a mistake. So anyway, show of hands supporting Mr. Pettit-Demas putting together some type of a presentation. So, okay. All right. For that one, remote work assignment launched from home. My words, not anybody else's. How do we take advantage of some of the things we learned from COVID that actually worked? It's really where we are right now. Can we enable some of the things that are efficient and effective to remain a permanent fixture, such as launching from home? If you're in a position where you could start your day at home and inject into the workforce out into the community instead of coming back here first, which is traditional, right? You clock in, get your stuff, and leave. If that's an already administrative decision that's already been handled, then we can stop that one. If it isn't, then I would encourage it. One of the things that I've noticed, not here necessarily, but throughout, is for some reason my phone calls get answered a lot more. Not calling here, but calling other jurisdictions. And a lot of times it's somebody that's actually working from home, but their job is to answer the call in that department and then either help me with my problem or move it on to somebody who quickly gets a hold of me. I've been amazed with DelDOT here recently. I mean, literally, I get a hold of people, and one of the things they're saying is they're teleporting, I think they're calling it. So I'll end with that. I mean, there might be some more conversation. It might be a bigger picture. It might be related to some of the possible funding that we've just received, where we enable more of the staff. Now, the key, enable the staff to determine when it's effective to launch from home. Or not. Heck, we could be talking about an event here where they couldn't come in but could still maintain working from home so that the county doesn't have to shut down. I don't know, I'm rambling, but I'm just throwing it out there because this COVID thing and launching from home has presented itself. We could utilize potentially some of the funding to ramp up our ability to do that. If this is making any sense, chime in. If it's falling on deaf ears, that's cool too. We can move on. So, yeah, Ms. Maston.
A perfect example of being able to work from home is in terms of bad weather. When, typically, the building's going to open 2 hours late. Well, that's great, but depending upon where people live, that could still be a problem. So I can only speak from my customer service work. For the last 10 years I worked, all my folks had laptops and the ability to switch an 800 number so that if you hit 1, you went to the West Coast, which was a girl sitting in Smyrna handling the West Coast, or 2, 3, 4, 1 up to 15. If it happened in the Singapore office, I could switch it to Wilmington quick. But the people were actually working from home, and I found the productivity was just as great working from home as what it is when they're in the office, if not better, because you have less distractions when you're working from home. So I can certainly support work from home because I had about 15 years experience with that. And it does work. It's a great morale booster, especially when it's bad weather, that people don't have to risk their life coming into work. So I certainly support working from home when it's needed.
Mr. Hall?
Yep, fully support it. I like the idea of using, if we can, using COVID funds to buy the infrastructure that we need to enable it. And I mean, it's been around the corporate world for a very long time, federal government, state government. So let's maximize it here.
We don't want to lose our footprint, obviously. We have to be responsive to the community. I think maybe the next step would be there's probably some ripple effects. It's most likely not that simple. Obviously, it's going to require some management, department head management of sorts. I guess the statement might be, if we agree that as a commission we like the idea, want to know more what it looks like, then what we would do is, I guess, ask, what does that mean? Coming out of COVID, is there anything that we need to clarify? Is there anything that we need to articulate that we support? Or after meeting, it can be presented to us that it's already being done and we're good. I guess that's what I'm looking for, Mr. Pettit-Demas. If we agree there's merit in having that conversation, what would you see as the next step? I don't think the commissioners should sit up here and say yes and no.
Yeah, we, the staff level would need to, take a look at the positions that lend themselves more naturally to a remote work situation. There are some positions that just have to be performed on site, and we would, focus on those that, we've learned through this whole process that several of our, a lot of our employees can work from a remote location and still be effective. So I think it's just identifying those and then, looking at them, deciding which would be the balance between on-site and remote. We're doing it right now in some departments, and there's some rotation going on, employees. So I think we can be kind of as fluid as we could be in different departments that lend themselves more naturally to that type of work, and bring forward the basics of a proposal to you at a future date.
Is good with that?
And I like the idea of that it was discussed here about investing in the technology to make it more broadly available. That was somewhat of a constraint that we had through this time, was the availability of the technology we need to get people situated. And we've gotten there. I think it'll be great to have some capacity, beyond where we're at. And so I like that aspect of it as well. And there's probably some of the folks we could probably learn from them who are working remotely. Well, it'd been great if I had this also, or, I'm not sure what this is, but there could be certain aspects of their work remote that just didn't work as good as it could. And it might be hardware, it might be other software pieces.
Sure.
Thanks, sir. So 3 things. First of all, I want to make sure that if we go down this path, directors, supervisors, and managers are responsible for productivity and making sure that this is working, that it's not a day off. We're not talking about taking vehicles home and working out of their homes to go to inspections and stuff. If they want a vehicle, they still got to come back here to get it. And then the third thing is, one thing we found out in Smyrna School District this past month or month and a half is that teachers and students really like their snow days. So even though that we had 3 snow days where it was impossible to get buses to come out, and we switched to a virtual day, we picked one of those days to be a true staff and student snow day because of the mental health reasons for doing that. So I don't want this to say every time that there's an event where they don't have to come into work, we're just going to flip to everybody work virtually from home, because that just doesn't work for me.
Maybe a liberal leave, where you say instead of a liberal leave, you say a liberal telework if you're able. I don't know. That's something that they can decide. I want to clarify that the vehicles from home, I think, is an effective measure that's utilized. Okay. Good then, right? Marching orders are good, and we're ready to end that one, okay? We didn't need a show of hands. I guess we can show of hands in support of what we just said. There we go. Okay. Thanks. Back to you, Commissioner Angel.
Public comments on any of these 3 items? Anybody online?
Do we have anyone online still, Mark? We do have some folks online. If you wish to speak, *3 to bring you into the room. *3. Doesn't appear we have anyone interested. Thank you.
One more call. Anybody public want to speak? Seeing nobody, back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. That concludes our committee meetings for this evening, and we'll go into a workshop. I think we'll take a 5-minute break beforehand. I've had to request. So it's 8:08. Be back here about 8:14.
Okay. Like that.
Okay, let's come back to order here and work on this budget review. Debbie, Susan, turn it over to you.
Okay, I'd like to start with, made a couple of changes on the revenue and expense summary sheets. This here is page 1 for the revenue, and there's no changes on there, but on page 2, the reserve transfer from general fund for the operating expenses has changed to, which are all highlighted in yellow. $2,051,700. And the reserve transfer from general fund to capital projects is now $1,054,200. And then the expenses, the only change that on the front page is recreation went up by, I think, $3,700 for the security guard, which we talked about last week. And on the second page, the building security for this building went up. And reserve transfer for capital projects is now $1,030,200. And I changed the PPA amount to reflect the one that wasn't approved. And then I added the 2% COLA, which was approved in the previous meeting. So those changes are just based on the items that we discussed last week. So the reserve transfer from capital projects, one of the things that for the maintenance building, we talked about funding the whole amount in fiscal year 2022. So I took that amount, the $150,000 out that was budgeted in there because it will be coming from reserve capital projects. So I took that out. And like I said, the security guard increased and then the COLA. So those are the changes that are reflected on those two summary sheets. Is there any questions on that?
You said something about 150,000.
I'm sorry, what?
150,000 related to?
The maintenance building?
Okay. So you were talking about where the funding was coming from. Is that where?
Correct. We had it coming from the fund balance, the general fund balance,
Yep.
but it will be coming from capital projects reserves instead. So it doesn't affect the general fund. It will only affect the capital projects.
Mhm.
Coming from the balance that was left from the rec center.
I understand all that, and year, and that leaves the remaining balance in that fund of maybe $500,000, roughly, about 400,000. And then the question might be, and this is just, I haven't spoken to Commissioner Sweeney about this, is, yeah, I understand that it's Parks and Rec Fund. There are other areas where maybe they could share in the effort to fund that. Are you interested in looking in that, or are you good with the 400 right now, the way it stands?
There was a question about whether that $400,000, because it's RTT funds, can be used for anything else.
That's a very good question.
So I do not know we can even use it for what they've suggested.
It can be used for what they suggested, yes.
Okay.
Because one of the things we have is a contingency fund of over $1 million that traditionally doesn't get used. It wouldn't be offensive to have the contingency fund be $800,000 this year and use $200,000 to help cover the cost. Am I wrong there? If we made that decision? And again, if you're already good with the funding, then let's just move on.
I am concerned because I was hoping to get started on the next phase of the Kesselring property development, and that would have been great seed money to start that project, but we don't have any consensus on moving forward with big projects on any of the parks at this point. So
I'm going to say one thing rather important to me. I always envisioned us when we were building Kesselring, I call it the park. When I call it the Boys and Girls Club, Kent County Parks and Recreation Facility, and the turf, the field, and the amenities surrounding it. That's what I don't understand, what we're holding off on. If we have this large sum of money, why are we holding off on the amenities that I always thought were envisioned to be built possibly by now, especially since we have the funding?
I don't think there's a master plan yet for the park. I know that those are all ideas that we wanted, but I think that the parks staff would like to move forward with an indoor facility. So we just have to come up with a master plan and one that Levy Court agrees to, and if we take $400,000 out of that $883,000, it certainly cuts into any opportunity we have to do anything at the parks.
Outdoor space and outdoor field space, given the fact that I've come through soccer and baseball and all those things here recently with youngsters, I thought that was at a premium, especially locally. I think that committee and that plan is something that probably should be brought to us, right, for a discussion on whether or not we have the same vision to go in big on a gym or soccer fields or what have you. All right, but anyway, back to the funding. If you're not going to move on it, then let's move on.
Sorry. The first one was on Tuesday, March 3rd, I believe. You guys had a discussion about a water park amenity. And I just want to make sure, because this year we have $50,000 being funded, I think for a total of $250,000 over 5 years. I wanted to make sure that this particular capital project is supposed to move forward.
Right, so I know that this was a wish of Commissioner Angel's, but I thought that the consensus of the rest of the commissioners was that a water park wasn't necessarily in the books starting this year. Would not be, let me phrase this correctly, I would be in favor of removing that $50,000 from this year and pushing it out at least 1 year and using that $50,000 toward something else this year.
If I could just for a point of clarification, when we talk about this, I think this was envisioned not as a water park, a splash pad, which is a lot different than a water park. I don't think we ever really benefited from seeing like visuals of what we were talking about when these were put into budgets, but it probably would have been helpful. A splash pad is something that is kind of a surface that shoots water jet up and people can play in it. There's no permanent pool. Everything drains back into the surface. And so that's kind of a splash pad. Last time we talked, there was we kind of drifted from the splash pad to something with a permanent pool, and that's something different. Again, it gets into more management. You might get into things like lifeguards and all that other sort of thing when you have permanent pool involved. I just wanted to make that clear that this was not envisioning that kind of a facility. This was more of just a splash pad that would probably attract younger children and things like that to play during hot times of the year, as I understand it.
Jeremy Shepherd did say that this will have to have a lifeguard on site in order to have this.
Not a splash pad.
Okay.
That's not accurate.
As I had the conversation a little earlier with Mr. Pettit-Damaggio also, I've seen the splash pad, and I think it's kind of neat. It might be an amenity that certainly would be useful in a park like I don't know, wherever, Browns Bench, Brecknock, whatever. But that's vastly different than what was presented last week. I wouldn't be in favor of that one. A water park's vastly different than a splash park. If a splash park is your interest, say, show us what it looks like.
Well, I'll be amenable to the splash pad. It's water in one of our parks, so that's fine with me.
Statement after that to make, but let's stay on this one first.
Well, Debbie wanted an explanation, so now she has an explanation. So, I mean, I'm still opposed, but obviously there's at least 3 others or 4 others that are in favor of this, so.
Can we get a
move on.
vote on who supports it?
Yeah, I guess the question is, do we want this to stay in the FY22 budget, because it's planned, did someone say something? I'm sorry. It's planned to be a $50,000 expense in the upcoming budget, but if it's something we're not ready to do this year, that frees up that $50,000 or moves it out of the budget. And I think that's really what Debbie was getting at, you know, not necessarily the merits of the project per se, but is it something we want to do this year?
How many people want to leave it in? Hands up.
I have a quick question.
Mr. Angel.
Due to the COVID and how things are right now, and I know it's getting better, I don't have a problem moving it out, because by next year, we'll be out of the COVID issue and anything else that pops up in between, the new stuff that's starting to pop up. So I don't have a problem moving it out a year, but I still would like to see it done in one of our parks. So,
Let me rephrase the question. How many want to move it out to next year? Five.
Thank you.
This year's budget, that's fine, whatever. I would like to see, because the impression now is that we want to do it. I don't know if I want to do it. I certainly want to look at it. As I understand it, it seems like a neat deal, and I'd like to see what it would look like. I'd like to know if Jeremy could present something, but that's all.
So this gives us a year to have Parks and Rec put something together and run it by the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee, and then bring it to Levy Court to a committee meeting.
But again, given the COVID circumstances, you know, and any outdoor recreation that we can provide in a timely fashion matters, especially if it's on the cheap. So I don't know if it needs to be a year that we wait, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. I wanted to speak again. I think that I sort of drove the train on the 400,000 coming out of the rec's remaining balance. I'm just going to articulate for the record that I am in favor of bringing 200,000 out of contingency and leaving 200,000 in, if that's the correct number, in the remaining Parks and Rec balance for the gym.
There's a slide.
I'm just putting it out there for you, but I'm going to leave it in your court. I'm offering that up as an option because I clearly was the one that pushed the 400 specifically from the rec center. Thanks.
So on this one issue, it doesn't take us out of looking at it, number one. And number two, it still goes along the same line of what I've always liked about what, you know, Susan and Finance and Mr. Pettit-Damaggio have done, taking these big ticket items and spread them out over years. Because even if we decide we're going to do it, we're still 5 years away from having the funding that we think will cost to put in a splash park at Big Oak.
Right.
So it's not going to happen this year anyway, unless Jeremy comes back and says, oh yeah, we can put a nice one in for $80,000 and then we'll just find the money from somewhere. Mm-hmm. If that's the direction of Levy Court at that point, So I'm missing something about the $800,000, $883 that's sitting there in the account that's left over from the recreation center. You want to pull 600,000 out?
See, this is where I talk too
That's what I'm
fast on
missing.
myself. I get it. Last week before that, whenever it was, I said that we needed to elevate the urgency for the maintenance shed. We all agreed to that. But I wanted to pay for it with existing funds. I used the number 900,000 sitting there left over from the rec center. So 900,000 minus, if we decided on 400,000, if that was the number, and it all came out of that account, instead of it all being taken from that account, maybe 2 from that account. And then you have to identify 200,000 more, and there's 2 options. You could take it from contingency, or there is there's an economic fund there that's carrying a balance maybe 650 grand right now that is not in danger of being drawn down. And if it ever was, that would be a really good thing. I would have no problems funding that from a general fund savings or something if we drew down that entire number.
Okay, so Debbie said you have a slide coming up. Is that this slide right here?
I moved it to this slide.
So instead of the 150 and 150, which is still less than what Sam thought the building was going to cost based on the square footage and the anywhere from $125 to $184 a square foot. $200 from the rec center, remaining funds, and then whatever the rest is comes from,
General fund reserves.
unreserved funds.
No, I make a suggestion. Correct me if I'm wrong. We are deciding tonight to have a contingency of a grand total of $1 million. Does it have to be $1 million? Can it be $800,000 and still be safe and put us in a very positive
You say
position?
contingency, what do you mean?
The contingency in this general fund, in this budget this year, is listed at $1 million.
Okay.
And we rarely, that's a good thing. We typically don't draw down a total of $1 million
Well,
if that ripples it.
there's actually, on the second page of the revenue, the 2 yellow ones, and plus the 606, those are all the things that will be coming out of reserves.
I'm getting hung up now, and that's okay, because I don't need to hold this thing up. Is what I said made any sense to you, Ms. Dorm? Yes. Because I apologize, Debbie, but I'm not saying it right clearly, so.
I just wanted to know if you were addressing me.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. You're saying you did contingency on the expenditure page from $1 million to $800,000. Because this money is going over to capital projects fund and it's not being, this expense is not contained within the general fund. Technically, we would, if we reduce that contingency to $800,000, we would actually reduce the bottom line or reduce another expense in there. The transfer over for this project would have to be from our reserves or from something else that actually has money that's earned right now. Contingency is like what we might get, it's not a guarantee. So if you wanted to start the project right away, we would just take it out of reserves.
Interesting reserves, money that's already allocated.
So it's kind of going back to where
Sure.
we were. We had $150,000 coming from reserves for this project. And then we said we would add the $200,000, you're saying add the $200,000 from the rec center. So we would need another $50,000.
So, but with this number that's here, the $1,054,000, that $150,000 has been taken out of that number. So whatever you decide to do, if you do 50-50, 50% from the fund balance and 50% from capital projects reserves, you would have to increase this number by $200,000. Does that make sense?
It doesn't.
You know, if I knew what other capital projects had balances of projects that were done, it would help. I mean, are there other projects that are done that we could close out and transfer that money? I know that the rec center is really, really popular because it's almost $900,000. That's a big number. But are there other capital projects that we've completed that still have balances that we just shift the money around to be able to use it?
Let me explain what we do with that. We do take those balances that are done and we put them back into, we leave it in the capital projects fund and we put it into like a contingency for like Parks and Rec and one for public safety, and then we recycle it. So when you see the statement that it's being budgeted from reserves, that's money that was left over.
So it's already been accounted
Yes.
for. Okay, thanks.
Mike, you have any thoughts on the funding for this?
Sorry, for the outbuilding, are we talking about?
Yes, uh-huh.
Yeah, well, yeah, I thought based on last week's discussion, it was going to come out of the capital projects reserve, which, and just for everyone's understanding, when we say capital project reserve, we are talking about that $900,000 plus, right? It's kind of aggregated in
So it's
reserves.
multiple projects.
Yes.
Do we know what that total is? That total?
I'd have to get it for you, not, as, part of the reserves is RTT and part of it is not.
Right.
You know, it's tax money. So we do have to separate it out. This is RTT eligible, the building is.
So if it's RTT eligible, that means it's eligible from both funds, because RTT
That's
is the
correct.
more restrictive. So when Mr. Buxton says, I'd like to take $400 out of the capital reserve fund, it just so happens that the $900,000 in the rec center is the most prominent one, but there's probably other projects that have closed out with balances that now included in that total of capital reserve funds.
Yeah.
So I'm okay, in that case, you know, I'm okay with the $400,000. You guys are just classifying it as different buckets, but it's all still one bucket. Right? You get that, Eric?
You supposed to have that about 10 minutes ago.
I'm sorry?
Jody.
Yeah, hey, I don't want to, I thought it was coming out of, you know, 893 minus 400,000 is going to leave 493,000 in there. That's not the way it looks. There might be $3 million in there minus 400,000. We don't know.
But my understanding next year at this time, if nothing's done, next year in the budget, it will show a deficit down to 400 and some, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
But we don't see that number in any of these budgets, right?
But if you're okay with it, I just wanted you to know that I didn't leave you hanging, and I don't
Yeah,
want
thanks, I
Parks and Rec to
appreciate
do
that. Susan, can you share that with me tomorrow, in email?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, appreciate it.
Is that fund, the capital fund, projects fund, is that the fund that past a couple times we've given money to local police? Is that where that money's come from?
Money to who?
I think he's referring to the community projects.
Oh, Policy
Assistance
30?
Fund. Yeah, Policy 30 money.
No, I'm talking, I don't think we had the policy 30 when last time we gave money to the local police and the state police.
Oh, no, you're
Oh,
correct. That's correct.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's where that money came from, the capital projects.
We actually did it out of the general fund.
Okay.
One was another option. That one right now, that's got almost $600,000 in it.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up is it's been, believe it or not, it's been 7 years since we've done that contribution to the local police and the state police. So when we started talking about that a while back, I couldn't believe it was that long ago. But I do think it would be something that we might consider this year if we can, if we have some funds. I don't forgot what we gave last time. Was it 300,000?
Last time I thought we took 175,000 perhaps, and half of it went.
Police.
Pardon me?
Then the state police.
Yeah, half of it went to the state police, and half of it was divided up to local police departments based on their assist to the state police, and it worked pretty well.
I know it's appreciated, and the
I
money
think it was
went to good use.
150, and we took 75, gave it to the police, and the other 75 was divided up. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that's how it went.
So I want you all to keep that in back of your mind if that's something, you know, we want to work towards doing this year. Like I said, it's been 7 years, and you know, their expenses haven't
any of
gotten
that
any
other
less
money?
either. So
Are they eligible for any of that COVID money?
Probably.
yeah, they're getting their own.
Okay, so this maintenance building is being funded at $400,000 through the leftover money from the rec center. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Sorry, she's asking down here.
Oops. Okay, last week, Commissioner Buxton had talked about the turf field public address system. The total amount of the funding is $70,000, and we currently have $25,000 already budgeted, and we're proposing $10,000 in 2022. And Commissioner Buxton was interested in funding the remaining balance in 2022. So I just wanted to get clarification. Are we funding it all this year? Or are we sticking with the plan of 10,000, 15,000, and 20,000 in each year?
Clear, the reason for that is because of the $900,000 balance that is set there. You would logically think a significant portion for the Parks Rec facility to include the land. So why are we, that fund was generated for the purpose of improving that facility. Why would we then be funding general taxpayer money? That's why I stated that.
Well, I'm going to guess, and I hate to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I think with the federal dollars coming in, tourism is one of the sectors that would be very easily to target some of that money at. And it may be a better use of that money to fill the gap in than use any of the county money. So just, if we want to delay this and see if that's, one way to fill the shortfall, then it would just save us from using our own money.
Just a point for a little humor. If that money covers audio for the outdoor field, wow. Wow. But that's not a laugh at you. That's a serious statement. I'd be surprised. But I'll do whatever you want. I just told you why I supported moving forward, but you guys decide. Commissioner Sweeney, what do you want to do?
When are we having our discussion about the COVID funding?
Well, we were going to have a relatively broad-based discussion after next week's meeting. We were going to talk about it in leadership tomorrow first, and floated the idea in an email. I think it resonated with several of you to begin to have a discussion about a plan before, the first big chunk lands on our lap. And so we probably won't get real fine-grained with that. I don't anticipate that, but I think we would at least start talking in broad terms, some basic themes or target areas that the Levy Court wishes to direct first, the prioritization of that. As we basically have about 2 months before the first allocation. And I think it'd be good to start to have those discussions.
So Susan or Debbie, if we decide just to leave this like it is for the ongoing budget year, and then 3 weeks from now we decide, well, we can use COVID money to pay for a tourist-related outdoor PA system, then
Public safety system.
this whole count goes away, right? So I don't care. Leave it the way it is. I see Mr. Buxton's point, but back in 2015, the original plans for the gym had an indoor facility. And I think that the idea from Parks and Rec is that the leftover rec center money would go toward the next phase of the facility, not the park. The facility being an indoor rec field on the open grass. That's what they want.
I understand that, but that's not the intent, because clearly the turf field is not an indoor facility. But let me speak more specifically to where we are, why I waste his time. That project should be paid for by money allocated from the taxpayers in the county, because we planned that. This is not COVID related. We shouldn't be spending COVID money on an audio system for a football field. So I disagree with that completely. I'll get off the soapbox now and let's just move on. Let's do whatever I'm not going to, let's move on. They put it out 3 weeks, 3 months, whatever you want to do.
Just one last thing on the rescue funds. The U.S. Treasury really has not published yet we're tracking in different sources, you know, the information as it's coming available, and we'll continue to report on that as it does become available. There are a lot of ideas that I know everyone is thinking about, and part of the rescue funds are covering a lot of the things that we've already talked about in different ways that'll come through the state, through state agencies and various other nonprofit organizations and so on. So we're going to need to see how it all filters down, along with the money that will be earmarked directly for Kent County. But I think next week's discussion will be, you know, a good starting point to start to talk about the primary interests of Levy Court on how that money might be beneficial here. So, thank you.
So do we want to just leave this capital project as it shows
Yes.
in the?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Alan, do we have any update on the pension? No? No? Okay. So the only question I have on the OPEB is, I got confused on whether we were, the recommended amount is 2.5 million, and built into the budget is the 2.7, which is the contribution for 2021, and the recommendation is to continue with the 2.7, but I just wanted to make sure that that is what you guys agreed to. Is everybody in favor of the 2.7?
Everybody in favor? Looks like consensus.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next action item that I have, well, Alan's got slides for the pay study, so I'm just gonna go to the next slide real quick. Currently, in the fiscal year 21 budget, we have in the narrative that we were going to be paying the attorney fees at $180 an hour. Currently, we're only paying $165, which needs to be fixed. The county attorney is requesting to increase the hourly rate to $210 an hour. I would like to know what rate of hourly rate you would like the attorney fees to be.
What are we currently paying? I know what it says, $180 an hour, but we've only been paying $165 up until recently, right?
Yes, and I believe, Mr. Petitmage, we're going to make it right with the previous, for the previous.
We're going to pay a retroactive to when we
Yes.
agreed on it last year.
Yes.
Right. So right now it's 180, starting from now, or last week.
Yeah.
And we want to go, our attorney wants to go to 210.
Is he looking at us?
Mr. Pepper? President Pepper?
Mr. Buxton?
I didn't hear it, but I'm sure it was a good one. No disrespect, but as is typical for me, I want to understand better. Other than the ask, what's prompting this, I would like to hear from Mr. Petitmage if in fact the county administrator is an employee, technically. Possibly, what are the other jurisdictions paying, including maybe the city, whatever our relative jurisdictions paying that's prompting this move, because I know we just moved to 180 here recently. So that's what I would need before I would entertain moving it to 210.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Buxton. Right before the meeting, I did have a brief conversation with County Attorney Eliason about this subject, and Craig may be the best to answer that question, at least from his experience, and also, you know, how much of change this is from the normal rate that is charged by, in the private sector by the public for legal services. So I don't have a good feel for that at this point, but I'm sure that the solicitor does, so.
Thank you. This could be helpful. I did a quick calculation excluding Kent County. I was thinking of the 6 municipalities I've done work for in the last year, let's say. Well, yeah, 6 to 8 months, say. I did a quick calculation, and the average comes to 223.
The average rate is $223 per hour.
Correct.
It's a base that's used in the municipalities, jurisdictions right here in Kent County or nearby.
Kent and Sussex.
Kent and Sussex County. Do you know what Sussex County pays? Do you have any idea?
Oh, I do not. Right. Oh, there's one Newcastle County in my calculation also.
Overpays and maybe?
I do not.
Did you use all the rich places down in Dagsboro to generate that number, buddy? Because I'm going to look into it.
I just did the 6 that I have worked on personally.
Because we got to pay studies. And that information, if you're good with that, Mr. Pettit-Miles, there's no disrespect to Mr. Eliason, but using that information, are you good with this recommendation? Because if you are, then I am.
Well, I do know this. I know that Mr. Eliason and other attorneys from his firm provide us with excellent service, and they're always available for us. And if we were paying, I'm not sure what your billing rate is to non-government entities. You comfortable sharing that?
$350.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
$350.
$350.
Been doing this for 37 years.
So $350, and so it is a significant discount, and we do get regular service. We can check what Sussex is paying. I know Newcastle County has their own staff attorneys, and it probably is a lot more on per annum than what we're paying to have in-house attorneys. And so I think we do continue to get a very favorable rate, and quality service. So not just from Mr. Eliason, but also from Mr. Townsend and Mr. Edwards, who also provide legal services for the same rate.
This levels everyone. This levels up all legal services, not just credit.
Yes.
I'm not going to oppose it at all. He articulated his point. What am I supposed to say?
Can we see a consensus for the proposed $210 instead of sitting here hashing it over? $210.
I have a quick,
Sorry?
Mr. President.
Mr. Angel?
Yes.
I just wanted to add something real quick that with Mr. Eliason here on the lighter side. He sits here and listens to us for $180, and he gives us advice for $210. So, I mean, just to have a pay scale there.
I swear, if you show up in a new car next week, you're out of here.
Not a chance.
You got that, Debbie? 210.
I think Susan had a question.
I just wanted to know if it's going to apply to the mission attorney also.
I don't know. Did they get the same rate?
Well, I think our tradition in the budget is to set a rate, and it applies to all legal services. So I think that's what we're talking about here. Is that right?
Moving on.
We set one rate.
Okay. So, Alan, do you have slides for the pay study?
So I guess Ms. Maston's running this committee. So the last week, at the end of the meeting, there was some discussion about the pay study, and there was a lot of questions. And so I tried to prepare some information that might bring the whole situation back to, I guess, a level of understanding, mostly because this has been going on for a while, thanks to COVID. So as you may recall, an RFP was issued, seems like forever ago, in July of 2019. And as a result of that RFP process, later in the summer, Management Advisor Group was selected. And Dr. Long, as you may recall, came and made a presentation before the process really got going, and then ultimately came back and presented again. Whenever the contract was let, the folks from MAG, that's what we call them, came out and made some presentations to the managers and to the employees. They launched the electronic job questionnaires. They completed their report on March 20th, and I know you remember it just like I do. They were going to present that report on March, I think it was 17th. But that Levy Court meeting got canceled because COVID shut down everything. So, and as you may recall from the budget discussions back then, a lot of things were kind of put off because you wanted to wait to see how the economy shook out. But finally, Mr. Long was able to get in and make his presentation to you in November. And that report was provided to you back in March, and certainly he did a presentation in November. It was also uploaded onto the employee portal, and of course, quite a number of blogs written at the time about the report. So now we are, I guess, to the decision-making phase, and some of the pending items that we need some guidance from Levy Court on is, are you prepared to consider and ultimately approve the proposed classification levels, the pay structure, and the ranges, which I'm going to discuss just a minute. And then ultimately the implementation costs, since we're in the budget process. And then you would need to determine the appeal procedure, which certainly have recommendation there. MAG would then draft up, if you agree to do all this, brand new job descriptions, which, like all job descriptions, would be shared with the department heads to make suggested edits. These job descriptions, and they're prepared. MAG has not been fully compensated for the pay study yet because this was part of their job duties. So they, they're just patiently waiting for that. And then ultimately, all of that information would need to somehow, with lots of help from the finance department, be uploaded or entered into the payroll system. So as you may recall from the process quite a while ago, they were contracted to, of course, capture some job data from the employees. That's what the job questionnaires are about. They were trying to ensure internal equity. You obviously don't want a paramedic 3 making the same thing as a paramedic 1. And other positions like that. Identify the market adjustments, which they've done, and provide a plan, and then a process for future evaluation. Their quote does include quite a bit of free software. Yes, sir, Commissioner Angel.
Yes, Mr. Cueto, we don't have that in our packet. The timeline you're going through, the refresher, this says pay study, there's nothing after it. Okay. So can we get a copy of that so we have
I can certainly give you a copy of it, but you have seen all of this before, but I'll be happy to get you another copy, yes.
I'm sure Ms. Maston hasn't seen it.
Okay, I'll certainly.
So, I mean, we may have seen it as we've gone along, but it'd be great to have it for review as you're going through.
Sure, I'm sorry about that, because it really is reviewing really old information. This really isn't anything new I prepared. I lifted it right out of Mr. Long's presentation in November. Yeah. So he wasn't contracted, or they were not contracted to do staffing levels, reorganize, in employee performance, salary increases. That wasn't really the purpose. And the executive summary, all of this was presented to you as well back in November, and he reviewed it when he was there. And he has, that was the process that he followed to ultimately result in the pay study design recommendations that he made. So we got a little bogged down, I think, last week in how the current system compares to the new system. So as you recall, the current system has grades 1 through 22, but only 18 of those actually have positions in them. And you'll say, what? Well, it's because you may jump over a grade before you get to the next position. I don't want to pick on the county administrator, but at 22, the next person, I think, is 19. So there's some great difference between your executive, and the next top directors. And we do have currently 14 steps, and there's 2% between each step, 9% between each grade. That's the current system. Right? And this is what it looks like, if you've ever wondered. So there's rates for each step and each grade. Now, as you may know, we technically can award a 5% pay increase or a 3% pay increase. Usually that's for if you get a degree under our higher education and certification policy. So the county technically has what we call half steps, plus steps, which fall between those. But that would just be a 1% for those situations where you get an odd number. Okay? So that's how the current system looks. Now the proposed system, they call them a different number. We might end up having to have them a different number because I think the current payroll system uses 100, so it might have to be 2001. But so the grades go from 102 to 149, and there's 26 actual grades that have positions in them, similar to the other. There's oftentimes a little bit of space between them. And we don't start at 1. Nobody is a 1 because nobody wants to be number 1 unless they are number 1. But when it comes to pay, they don't want to be number 1. So we start, even in the current system, at grade 3. And there are 5% between the grades, and the steps go from A to T, which would be 20 steps. So that would raise the max on almost all positions. Technically, I think one position still is maxed even under the change of the classification system. Sure. Yes, that's going to be the next. Oh, yes. Well, so each time you do COLA, that 272 will be increased. Each time you do a step, that amount is increased. All of it, percentages would increase it each time you adopt a new COLA. Right? So, but let's talk a bit about the new step system. As you see, I tried to squeeze it all on there. Whenever we reproduce that in a spreadsheet, it'll probably be a little easier. But that's what it kind of looks like now. It goes out to step 20, which would be T, and goes down to 136. Actually goes, I think, 149, but those are not filled. And those are the proposed pay ranges. You'll notice that the width is all about the same, 45% from beginning to end. This is the cost as presented by Dr. Long. So to bring up the 66 people at the time that were below the minimums would be about 150. To get everybody on a step, because that step system is a little different, so you're going to have to move people up to get them on a step based on where their current salary is. You got to slot them in and then move them up, was another 121. And so the adjustment would be about 272,000.
What I was more specifically wanting to know is what are the long-term ramifications? What are the impacts to the things that we deal with, which are our biggest concerns, are other expenditures, personnel costs, not specific to this one-time allocation.
So the 272 would be added to the overall salary line. And each time in the future, COLAs are given, obviously, that 272 would be impacted by that percentage increase. It will certainly have an impact as well on the pension contribution, just as anytime you create a new position, it has a impact.
Is there an estimate on how big? Because any number that increases it is concerned right now with the thing ballooning. Is there any knowledge of the significant impact a year from now, or lack of, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now?
So I have not asked the actuary to calculate that up. I'm sure they'd be happy to for a fee.
Your professional opinion, will it make a noticeable difference in 5 or 10 years?
Right. So what I have noticed that has the greatest impact on our pension contribution is our fund performance. So if the economy continues to do well, the contribution, and also the other thing that changes is each time we or the commissioners agree to change a mortality table, or one of the assumptions, as you know, is vastly impacted when you wisely decided to reduce the interest rate, or the interest rate return. You went from an 8% and you've gradually dropped it down to a 7.25. But that's really been the driver of your increases for the past few years, because the economy has done well.
Those are out of our control. They were in our control. We could have made bad decisions. There was at least one decision that was effective. I don't think we can solely rely on the goodness of the stock market. So I'm asking you, these specific changes, do we have an understanding, and I guess the answer is no, of the long-term costs associated with our personnel costs, salary-wise, year to year, and then long-term?
So according to a slide, it has about a 2% impact on the current total wages. So I think it would be reasonable to suggest it might have a 2% impact on the $4 million contribution.
Are there any other jurisdictions that you know of locally or regionally who have a similar repositioning and repositioning of their steps that'll mirror ours?
So my understanding, and I think Dr. Long explained it when he was here in November, was that when he did his survey, he learned that our step system was a little out of whack comparatively, because we have the 9%. His findings were that most of them were 5%. He found that maybe ours, the maximum was too low and it needed to be widened, which is why he recommended it. So I know that the city of Dover just completed a study. Mike and I actually just got, I don't want to call it results, but I'll call it a report. So I have not been able to speak with the HR director from Dover to see what the study actually ended up recommending. But I think, as you recall from the results, it found that for the most part, Kent County is a very, especially in the benefits arena, competitive with our peers. Very competitive with our peers in the benefits arena. But he also identified a number of positions that are below market.
That's the answer I'm looking for, but it is, you don't know if Dover, I know the state doesn't, or any others have a process or a whatever it is now. And the answer is probably not. You know we're archaic. I understand the 9 to 5%, but the others you don't know.
I do. I mean, all public sector, they have pay ranges. Whether they divide them up in steps and do a step system like we do, I'm not sure of that. Okay. So, questions? Any questions, Ms. Maston?
I had a couple of questions for you. One is, if feedback from the employee council on the results of this. And in addition to the recommendations, it would be helpful to know what the feedback from the directors, department heads would be on terms of impact on, operations. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Are there concerns, issues that we should be aware of when we decide yes or no? So at the very least, I'd like to get some feedback on that.
Okay. Any other questions? So, Mr. Buxton, I did prepare a slide. I think last week you specifically asked if it would be possible maybe just to raise the folks who are below market up. I think I struggled a bit to try to give you an answer to why it would be very difficult to do. So I prepared a couple slides that might be able to demonstrate the challenge with simply doing that, if you're interested.
If the others are.
Okay.
I don't waste time on something that they're not supportive. I can articulate rather quickly where I am. And then you can decide. Because I expressed my concerns, and I still think they're valid concerns. I have a hard time understanding how we're going to make these systemic change to our step and pay structure and not have a ripple effect on the other end associated with costs. I don't know how that doesn't happen. So I remain concerned. However, I recognize we paid for this thing, even if I didn't support it. Once you pay for it, I find it hard not to implement it. What I fully support, what I fully supported before the study and after the study, like the old study, was to salary up anybody that was identified as undersalaried or not properly positioned. That's what we've done in the past. I fully supported that. That's why he's going to present this slide. What I don't support, what I'm having trouble supporting, is the 20-step thing and not understanding its impact. I'll end with this. However, I am prepared to fall in line if Mr. Coella and Mr. Pettit-Demise go on record tonight as stating they support this, then I'm going to support it because we paid for it. It is what it is. So that doesn't answer the question, do you want to look at the next slides? If you don't want to look at the next slides, then let's just get to the time to cut fish bait and cut and all that stuff.
Let's look at the slide.
Okay. So here's the dilemma, I call it, of just raising the below market folks up to market. And remember, we're talking about 66 people out of 281 or so, 260. So I identified the procurement specialist as one, only because that's a position you recently, remember you just added that new position in January as part of that budget review process. So the current start rate is a grade 9. It's at 42,506. Let's start. So when Diana fills that position, that would be what she would typically hire the person at under her current design. But the proposed rate, which would be the market-based rate, is 44,595. So the suggestion that, well, why wouldn't you just try to slot that person or that new hire, because if you hired someone without the new market rate, you're just perpetuating the fact that you're paying below market for that position. So the current system, where would I put this position? So I could just give the individual, the $2,000 difference, leave them in grade 9, which potentially could put them above someone who's been in the position for a couple of years. Or I could say, hey, let's reclassify the position, move them from a grade 9 to a grade 10. So the base rate should be 44.5. So do you put them at a 9 at 42.5? Or do you put them at a 10, which is 46.2? Which ultimately would mean they get more than just 2,000 more, they get 4,000 more. So I guess what I'm trying to convey is the difficulty of just maintaining the current grade and step system and then trying to correct these 66 positions that were found to be below grade. Accounting specialist 3, another good example. 46.2 is the current. Yes. The 3? Yes. Okay. So maybe accountant then. 1. Is an accountant 1 is 10? Yes. Okay. So it would start at 46,281. And if you were, the proposed rate's 46. So do you keep them at a 10 or do you put them in 11? So this is that reclassification process. Then as I looked at it a little bit more, I found paramedic 2. Good example. So the current rate's 50,000. The study says we should start them at 51.6. So where do you slot that new person or that person who is a step A, just got promoted into or hired into a paramedic 2? They wouldn't typically be hired into it. They could have been just promoted to it. Do you make them 11, which is where they are now, or do you make them a 12? How do you reach that market rate that we're supposed to be paying for the person? And then I started looking at others who are already 2. So we have a 1 right now. Usually column requires his paramedic 1s to be in the job for at least 2 years before they're eligible to go to a paramedic 2. So we have 2 existing staff members, females, interestingly, who are at 51.9, and they currently have 3.5 years service now. So this, trying to slot into the existing grade, if we were going to pay this newly promoted paramedic 1 at a market rate, 51.6, he is only going to be $300. He's going to be within $300 of a couple of paramedics who have been with us longer. And so then you start getting to your equity issues between your pay grades. Also did Parks Worker 1 because they were recommended for a decent increase. Similarly, where would I put them? And if we were just going to try to slot them in, reclassify them, would I put them in at a 6 at the 32, even though it says they should make 34, or would I put them in at the 7, which is 35.7? So that's really the challenge of just trying to make the folks who are below market fit into the existing system. So I hope I explained that a little better. I know I was having a difficult time struggling with that concept, at least trying to explain it to you last week. Is it any clearer, Commissioner Buxton? Yes.
The last time we did a pay study, this was way more simple. Why? Because we chose to take a different path with this one?
So,
version, yes or no?
The last pay study did not recommend any changes to the classification system, the grading steps. Yep.
Which is why we're here. Which is why I wouldn't be here.
Are there any positions that would go, that would see a reduction in salary?
No. There is one position that still maxed out.
That in itself sounds unusual to me. That nobody.
So, yes, so you say, how do you get above the max? Good question. A couple of ways. So if you get a degree, you can get a 5% pay increase. So even if you're at the max, you can get a 5% pay increase. If you get a certification not required for your job, but relevant for your job under our policy P80, or now it's P215, you can also get additional pay increases. So you actually can find yourself pushed up to the max, above the max of your current grade. So we don't penalize you because you've been here 20 years and decide, or 14, and then avail yourself of some higher education or a certification.
And could we hear from the employee council?
Thank you, Commissioner Hall. I'll be real quick. On behalf of the Employee Council and the discussions that we've had around this issue, obviously, we support bringing folks into market value based on these studies that are done periodically by Levy Court and maintaining equity in the workforce from the lowest to the highest and seeing a proper career ladder with implemented step increases that you guys have been granting through your budgets with positive employee evaluations, and ultimately retaining employees and being attractive in the marketplace amongst our competitors, as you've heard specifically from Colin. So any study that promotes those sort of findings, I personally support, and the employees in general support as well. So that's all I have to say on that.
I just want to clarify, I'm on employee council as well. When the question was asked, do any positions get less money? The employer will not make less money because they'll be within the pay range, but anybody starting out in a position, I'll just give you my example, they will be making about $10,000 less if you hired somebody because they took the pay range so far down. And I found that they did that a lot with the supervisors. So like Chris said, there's definitely areas where they brought people up to their correct pay range, but I don't think that the whole pay study was exactly, I don't want to use the word fair, but valid. So, thank you.
Recommend that we use it?
Well, I have a different theory on how to do it versus, but I'm not paid to do that, so.
Well, do we also face, there are now two bills, one's in the state and one's in the federal government for increasing minimum wage. We not face the similar issues with minimum wage going up to $15 an hour over the next 5 years?
Yes, and certainly my recommendation would be that we get back on track and do these pay studies more often. When we have, at least for a few years, tried to do them every 3 years, and then the economic crisis, housing mortgage crisis interfered, and the 2009 one got delayed. And as you know, it took quite a while to come out of that recession, and we were able to do one in 2015, and then consequently moved on to a more of a 5-year cycle instead of a 3-year cycle. But you're absolutely right, as the minimum wage moves up, we could potentially be impacted that some of our lower grade positions fall below that. And it would certainly need to be looked at again in 3 to 5 years. I'm not quite sure how long they're planning for that minimum wage to be spread out.
Right, so adopting this now kind of heads us in a direction of being better able to accommodate any new laws that require us to increase to a minimum wage of 15 at some point in the future, if that happens.
Yes, sir, I would agree that it does put us on the right path.
Well, I'll just jump in to say that in the last 2 years, what I've heard is that we're having a hard time attracting and retaining paramedics. I know that we have a high-level position, I believe, in Public Works that's gone unfilled for a long period of time, and pay may be part of that. And we had a position in planning that went unfilled, and so if if we need to attract and retain talented employees, then I vote yes.
Mr. Quayler, are you in favor of us voting yes or no?
So I'm in favor of the pay study, and here's, this would be my fourth one. I came in at the tail end of the what's the name of that? MAI study, Commissioner Pepper, you probably remember. I think that one was done in '95. So it's my fourth one. Levy Court has consistently adopted the pay study recommendations for many reasons. I can tell you that some employees never believe they get it right. Some believe they always get it right. I believe we let the marketplace decide, and the consultant's paid to go out, analyze the study, what he finds in his market survey, and sometimes he's going to say that you should start at a little lower rate. Sometimes he's going to say start at a higher rate. This is why we hire professionals to do it, and I don't do it myself. So there's no bias, and there's no unconscious bias certainly in it. It is based on the results that he gets back in his pay study. So I do recommend it, yes.
Thank
Sorry
you,
for that
Mr.
long-winded answer.
Mr. Pettit-Mize, do you recommend that favor of this move, this action?
Thank you, Commissioner Buxton. The proposed pay scale that is before you does a couple of things. Number one, it's going to raise anyone who's below market to market. And that was one of the primary goals, to measure our pay grades and steps against what the market is. And are we, at market or above? And it looked at all the various job positions we have and compared us to our peers. And we were compared to, do you have a list of peers that we were compared to? That were fed into this system. And so we were evaluated in that regard. And what the study found that, some positions we are already at market. Some positions we may begin at market, and then as the career gets longer, we fall below market in the out years. And then there are some that were below market from beginning. And so what the new pay scale does is adjust for that. All of the steps will be in sync with the market. And just a minute ago, we were talking about paramedics, and I looked at the study here, and for paramedic 1, at the beginning step, we're above market. But by the middle of the range, we're kind of bottoming out, and by the time we get to the bands of the year 13, 14, we're substantially below market. And so I think we feel that. We hear, some of the more senior people from time to time talk about how they max out. And so I think this new pay scale corrects for that. It adds steps, 20 bands as opposed to 14, but it also corrects those intermediate steps so that we're not falling below market as we move further into our career. And that gets to the point that Chris Connolly was making, and that is, I think the proposed pay scale and grade system would create a better mechanism to a career path and to create ladders within certain types of jobs, because it's going to create more banding where we can create opportunities for promotions to additional grades that we currently, because of the 9% jump, it's too high a jump. We're not going to, from a 1 to a 2 is a 9% jump. This will be bringing it down further, but it'll create a career path opportunity or ladder opportunity for promotions as time goes on. I think it does work to help retain employees because of those features. So for that reason, for those reasons, I support it and I recommend it.
Any other questions?
weigh in on our I can weigh in on my position rather quickly.
Go ahead.
I'm not in favor of the mechanisms that were used to go into this study. It is what it is. That ship sailed. I'm very concerned about the ripple effects and the costs that are unknown tonight. I think they're out there. However, I am highly in favor of writing those employees that were identified in the study, however that mechanism might be now. And I see no way of doing that other than supporting it. And so because of the fact that Commissioner or County Administrator Mr. Pettit-Damage has shown his support, and the Director of Personnel has shown their support, the Employee Council has shown their support, I'm in favor of this. I will tell you this, though. I'm not in favor of the budget, and I won't be supporting it unless we begin to address some of the systemic flaws in spending that I've articulated in the past that I'd be happy to talk about with anyone after the meeting or tomorrow, and anyone listening who would like to converse with me in private, I'd be happy to do that. That's where I am. Thanks.
Any other commissioner comments? Okay, let's get it. Commissioner Angel, do you want to say something?
Just something real quick. I know this is on the pay study, but we have a benefit package also that is outstanding. And I think that's one of Mr. Coelho's things that he's always read in me when we have our discussion is that we start off good, and then, yeah, we may end up in the middle and towards the end of longevity, but our benefit package, Levy Court does pay for, and that does come into, I think you get a statement once a year showing the worth of that. And I know a lot of people that have had to use that for illnesses and medical issues and had to take time off away from do the medical. It comes into play for getting them back here to work. So I just wanted to bring that up too. I see what Mr. Coelho is trying to say, and Upright and Mr. Buxton, the people that salaries are below level, but I still think that our pay scale with our benefits is above average for what we offer. Mr. Coelho, is that a true statement?
Cape County has great benefits. That was part of the report, and I don't know that anybody would want to diminish those. I think the market survey actually indicates that we are not as competitive as we should be or could be, and really that's what's before us is the compensation of the employees. If your benefits were bad, I would expect you'd want to improve those. I would say that our benefits are equal to or better in some cases than our other jurisdictions, but I wouldn't say outrageously better.
Thank you for that short version.
All right, any other questions before we do consensus here? Seeing none, let's hands up in favor of approving the pay study. Looks like 7 up.
Yeah, I believe so. That's it. Thank you.
Debbie, did you have anything else?
No, I did not.
Got everything? Okay.
I have one other thing. I first started on Levy Court in 1994, and at that time, all the people that we put on our committees were making $100 per meeting. $100 doesn't go as far as it did in 94, and time they take taxes out of that, they're probably getting around 75 or a little less to come to the meetings, take time out of their days and research and all that kind of stuff. I would like to know if it's feasible, raising the people that are on the boards from $100 to $125 per meeting. I don't think we're talking about a whole lot of money. I'd ask the county administrator what his thoughts were on that.
Thank you, Mr. President Pepper. Right now, you're correct. It's $100 a meeting for most boards and $125 for the chairperson. And would your proposal be $125 and $150?
Yes.
I think given the level of commitment that our boards and commissions show, that's not unreasonable adjustment.
Thank you. Any commissioner comments on that? Mr. Hall?
Well, it's something I've been thinking about, and I called around to the other counties, and we're far below both other counties. So I'd be willing to go to 150 and 175 since we're talking about going all the way back to 1993, and we haven't made a change in all of that time. And recognizing everything that they do for the county, level of dedication, we just show that appreciation and compensate for making up for lost time there.
I'd be in favor of that too. Any other commissioner comments?
We did make a change, I just want to put that, we used to be cheaper than that, and then we went to 100 and 125, but back in when we first started, Terry.
Right. Yeah.
25, I'm in favor of the 150. I'm in favor of it if we, what did we do, talk to the Dover Council and they said that theirs is 150? Have we talked to anyone else to verify that, or that, Mr. Hall, Commissioner Hall? Have you verified that with somebody that our number is way behind? Who'd you verify it with?
I called down to Sussex County, and I didn't want to go to Newcastle because it's just a different level of revenue up there. But I thought, by comparison, we should be at least on par. And I can't remember the numbers. I just know, I believe it was closer. It was well over $100, and I can double check that.
Can we verify that? I'd like to have an understanding of, is it 150 or is it 125? Because 125 is a nice bump. And if it is 150, let's go to 150, but let's verify it, I guess. You know me, man, I don't care if it's $1 million or $5. It is what it is.
I'm okay with Commissioner Hall's suggestion. I know that when Mr. Pepper was on here before, gas was only 15 cents a gallon, so.
Yeah, but, all right, any other commissioners want input on this? If not, who's in favor of Commissioner Hall's suggestion of 150 and 175 for the chairman? All right, 6 up. Thank you very much. I'm sure that I haven't talked to any of our board members or commission members about that, but I'm sure they will appreciate it. And I know we certainly appreciate all the time that they put in for us.
Record can show that I'm in favor of 150 after we clarify what the number should be. I'm not in favor of just picking one. That's all. So I'll make sure I call my rep.
Call your Sussex County representative.
Call my rep. He's going to say, hey, man, why'd you vote against me?
Anything else, Debbie or Susan? Anything else from any of the commissioners? Okay, we are done for the evening. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for all the employees that hung around. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Peace. Thanks, everybody.
Good.